Mr. President, over the last few decades, the real middle-class families in America, and I say real middle class, I mean those that are making $30,000, $40,000, $50,000, $70,000 a year, not $400,000 a year. Those middle-class families have seen their jobs become more insecure, their wages stagnate. In fact, their income, adjusted for inflation, is less now than it was in the late 1990s. Their savings and pensions have shrunk or disappeared. The cost of education has soared. At the same time, the wealthiest Americans and large corporations grow ever richer and pay less and less in taxes. For example, just take dividends. Prior to 2003, dividends were always taxed as ordinary income. But now they're taxed at a less rate, as a capital gains rate. Income of hedge fund managers are taxed at a lower rate than middle-class families, the so-called carry interest rule. The share of our nation's wealth going to corporate profits has been rising, as the share going to wages and salaries is declining. This has led, bit by bit, tax code change by tax code change, pension cuts by pension cuts, job outsourcing by job outsourcing, to an economy that's out of balance, that threatens the very fabric of our society. That's because the gap between the rich and the real middle class grows ever wider. That's because our economy is driven from the middle out and not from the top down. Our economy is driven by middle-class families with good jobs and money in their pockets to spend. So our first goal must be to put Americans back to work and to get our economy moving, to rebuild the real middle class now. Now, the average American across our land today, they probably think that what we're about here is just that, to solve our country's most pressing problem, creating new jobs, laying the foundation for future economic growth, and thus reducing our deficits in the long term. But instead, we are here, tied in knots, to avert a manufactured fiscal cliff, which could have been avoided 6 months ago by the House passing S 3412 to avert the tax hikes on 98% of Americans. Now, I have said repeatedly that I will evaluate any such fiscal cliff legislation on how these proposed policies affect working families and the real middle class. Again, the real middle class, those making $30,000, $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 a year. So I am disappointed to say that, in my opinion, this legislation that we're about to vote on falls short. First, it does not address the number one priority, creating good middle-class jobs now. Unemployment remains way too high. This bill should include direct assistance on job creation measures. For example, our infrastructure, education, job retraining. How many jobs we see out there that are going wanting because people aren't trained for those jobs, and yet we don't have enough money to put into job retraining. This legislation before us neglects our most pressing concern at the present time, and that is the lack of jobs and the lack of qualified people to fill those jobs. Secondly, this proposal does not generate the revenue necessary for the country to meet its needs for everything from education to job training, infrastructure, research and development. The idea that people earning $300,000 to $400,000 a year could not pay the taxes they paid in the 1990s when the economy was booming is just plain absurd. But that's what we're being told, that people who make $300,000 or $400,000 a year simply cannot pay the same taxes that they would have been paying in the Clinton years. Furthermore, these wealthiest Americans made a lot of money in the last decade. So, what do? Now we're raising the estate tax exemption to $5 million. It was $1 million under the Clinton tax years, so now the few that are really wealthy made a lot of money. They've accumulated this wealth, and now we raise the estate tax so they can now pass it on without any of that gain ever being taxed, because the heirs now get it with what they call a stepped-up basis. So none of that is taxed. And so what we see then are the few who are wealthy getting more and more wealthy. So wealth becomes even more concentrated under this system. Now, some will say, what's the problem here? You wanted to protect middle class. They are. In this bill, how can you object if some higher income individuals are protected as well? Well, I point out these are not unrelated matters. With government investments and government spending dropping, being squeezed every year by my conservative friends on the other side of the aisle, with deficits remaining high, every dollar of sacrifice that the wealthy forego is sacrifice that we will later be asking of real middle-class, modest-income Americans. Every dollar that the top 2% of taxpayers do not pay under this deal, we will eventually ask folks of modest means to forego in Social Security or Medicare or Medicaid or Head Start benefits or other items that benefit the real middle class. I believe it is gravely short-sighted to look at these issues in isolation from each other, especially since the Republicans have made crystal clear they intend to seek mandatory spending cuts just 2 months from now, using the debt limit as leverage. So number 3, why in this deal do we make the tax benefits for the rich permanent while the progressive tax benefits we put in place in 2009 to help people of modest means, why are those temporary? For example, the estate taxes that benefit the wealthiest are made permanent. The earned income tax credit that affects the lower income, that's temporary. The income tax rates that are set now are going to be made permanent to benefit higher income individuals, but the child tax credit is made temporary. The AMT fix is made permanent, but the American Opportunity Tax Credit for modest families to be able to afford to send their kids to college, that's made temporary. In this deal that we're about to vote on, logic is turned on its head. We provide permanent benefits to those who need it the least, yet this deal sunsets the modest assistance to middle-class families. And again, I repeat, middle class, real middle class, not $400,000 a year middle class. I mean the real middle class. I think it is quite telling that last evening, Grover Norquist said he is for this bill, but our former Secretary of Labor, Bob Reich, is opposed. So maybe now I guess we are all believers in trickle-down economics. Not I. I guess we now redefine the middle class as those making $400,000 a year, when in fact, that represents the top 1% of income earners in America, not the middle class. So I guess that we now accept as normal practice in reaching bipartisan deals that the most vulnerable in our country, like those who are out of work and who depend on unemployment benefits, can be held hostage as a bargaining chip for more tax breaks for the richest among us. Now, I'm not saying that everything in this deal is bad. There are some good parts of this. But I repeat, I am concerned about this constant drift, bit by bit, deal by deal, toward more deficits, less job creation, more unfairness, less economic justice, a society where the gap grows wider between the few who have much and the many who have too little. So, Mr. President, for these reasons, I must in conscience vote no on this bill.